The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked briskly down the marble corridor toward the king's private study. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, echoing in the quiet hallway lined with centuries-old portraits of British monarchs. Today marked the beginning of what would become one of the most talked-about partnerships in recent royal history. King Charles III looked up from his mahogany desk as she entered, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a stack of official documents. The room smelled of old leather and fresh flowers, typical of the king's personal spaces. He had always preferred a warm, lived-in atmosphere rather than the cold formality that many expected from royal quarters. "Catherine, please sit," he said, gesturing to the comfortable armchair across from his desk. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week regarding the environmental initiatives." Kate settled into the chair, smoothing her navy blue dress. She had always felt comfortable around her father-in-law, even before William became heir to the throne. There was something genuine about Charles that put her at ease, unlike some other members of the royal family who maintained strict protocol even in private moments. "I've been working on some ideas," she replied, pulling out a leather portfolio. "The children's garden project could be expanded beyond just the palace grounds. We could create similar spaces in schools across the Commonwealth." Charles leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with interest. This was exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach he had hoped to see from the younger generation of royals. Kate's natural ability to connect with people, combined with her genuine passion for causes affecting children and families, made her an ideal partner for his vision of a more accessible monarchy. "That's brilliant," he said, removing his glasses and setting them aside. "But we'll need to be strategic about how we present this to the public, and more importantly, how we present it to the rest of the family." Kate understood immediately what he meant. While their collaboration made perfect sense from a practical standpoint, it was already causing whispers among palace staff and other family members. Some saw it as Charles showing favoritism toward William's branch of the family. Others worried about the optics of the king working so closely with his daughter-in-law, while other senior royals felt sidelined. The truth was simpler than the gossips imagined. Charles had always admired Kate's work ethic and her natural diplomatic skills. She had a way of making even the most formal royal events feel approachable and genuine. Her background as a commoner, something that had once been seen as a disadvantage, now proved invaluable in helping the monarchy connect with ordinary people. "I think we should start small," Kate suggested, opening her portfolio to reveal detailed sketches and plans. "One pilot program in a London school, then gradually expand based on what works and what doesn't." Charles nodded approvingly. This measured approach was exactly what he had come to expect from Kate. Unlike some family members who preferred grand gestures and immediate publicity, she understood the value of building something solid from the ground up. As they continued discussing the details, neither of them noticed the figure standing in the doorway. Palace aide Margaret Thornbury had arrived to deliver the king's afternoon schedule, but she paused when she heard their animated conversation. The easy rapport between the king and princess was evident even from a distance. Margaret had worked at the palace for over 20 years, and she recognized the signs of change when she saw them. This collaboration between Charles and Kate represented something new in the royal family dynamics. It wasn't just about environmental projects or children's programs. It was about the future direction of the monarchy itself. Later that evening, Margaret found herself in the staff quarters, sharing tea with several other long-serving palace employees. The conversation inevitably turned to what they had all observed that day. "It's quite remarkable, really," said James, the king's private secretary. "I haven't seen His Majesty this energetic about a project in months." "The princess brings out the best in him," added Sarah, who had worked with Kate since her engagement to William. "She has a way of making everyone feel heard and valued." But not everyone in the palace was celebrating this new partnership. In another wing of the building, phones were buzzing with messages between certain family members and their advisors. Some worried that Charles and Kate's collaboration was moving too fast, potentially overshadowing other important royal work. The concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Royal protocol had always been carefully managed to ensure that no single member of the family appeared to be gaining too much influence or attention. The delicate balance of roles and responsibilities had been maintained for decades, through careful planning and subtle negotiations. As Kate drove home to Adelaide Cottage that evening, she reflected on the day's meetings. She was excited about the projects they had discussed, but she wasn't naive about the potential complications. She had learned over the years that every positive step forward in royal life often came with unexpected challenges. William was waiting for her in their cozy kitchen, helping their children with homework while dinner simmered on the stove. This domestic scene, so different from the formal palace atmosphere, always helped her decompress after intense royal duties. "How did it go with Papa?" William asked, looking up from George's math worksheet. "Really well," Kate replied, kissing him on the cheek before ruffling Charlotte's hair. "We made some good progress on the environmental education program." William smiled, but she could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. He understood better than anyone the complex dynamics at play within their family. His father's enthusiasm for working with Kate was wonderful, but it was also potentially problematic if not handled carefully. That night, as Kate tucked their children into bed, she wondered what the coming weeks would bring. The projects she and Charles had planned would benefit countless children and families across the Commonwealth. But would the positive impact be worth the palace tensions that seemed inevitable? Only time would tell whether their partnership would strengthen the royal family or create divisions that would be difficult to heal. 3 weeks later, the first signs of trouble began to surface in the most unexpected way. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties, requested a private meeting with her brother Charles. The timing wasn't coincidental, and everyone in the palace knew it. The meeting took place in Charles's private sitting room at Clarence House, a space where the king often retreated when he needed to handle family matters away from the formal atmosphere of Buckingham Palace. Anne arrived precisely on time, as was her custom, wearing her trademark practical clothing and carrying a worn leather briefcase. "Charles, we need to talk," she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from him. Anne had never been one for small talk, especially when she had concerns to address. "I assume this is about the Environmental Education Initiative," Charles replied, setting down his cup of tea. He had been expecting this conversation, though he had hoped it might come later rather than sooner. "It's about perception," Anne corrected him, "and about the message we're sending to the rest of the family and the public." Charles raised an eyebrow. His sister had always been direct, but there was an edge to her voice that suggested deeper concerns than he had anticipated. Anne opened her briefcase and pulled out several newspaper clippings and printed articles from royal news websites. The headlines told a story that Charles hadn't fully considered. King Charles and Kate, the new royal power duo. Princess Catherine becomes king's right hand, and is Kate the future of the monarchy? The press is already creating a narrative, Anne continued, spreading the articles across the coffee table between them. They're positioning Catherine as your chosen successor for influence, bypassing William entirely in their storytelling. Charles picked up one of the articles, scanning the content with growing concern. The journalist had interpreted his collaboration with Kate as a sign that he was grooming her for a more prominent role in the monarchy, potentially at the expense of other family members. "That's not what's happening," Charles said firmly. "Catherine and I share common interests in environmental issues and children's welfare. We're working together because our goals align, not because I'm playing favorites." "I know that, and you know that," Anne replied. "But what matters is what everyone else thinks. And right now, some of our cousins and their advisors are wondering why their equally important work isn't receiving the same level of royal attention." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Charles's private secretary entered with a message that only added to the growing complexity of the situation. "Your Majesty, the Duchess of Edinburgh has requested a meeting regarding the coordination of charitable initiatives. She's concerned about potential overlap with her existing programs." Charles dismissed his secretary with a nod, but the damage was done. Anne's concerns were clearly shared by other family members, and the situation was escalating faster than he had anticipated. Meanwhile, across London at Kensington Palace, Kate was dealing with her own set of challenges. Her private secretary, Natasha, had compiled a folder of messages from various royal households, all requesting clarification about the scope and timeline of the environmental education project. "It seems everyone wants to know how this affects their own charitable work," Natasha explained, handing Kate the folder. "Some are worried about donor confusion, others about media attention being divided. Kate sank into her desk chair, suddenly feeling the weight of expectations she hadn't fully considered. When she and Charles had begun their collaboration, it had felt natural and positive. Now she was beginning to understand that nothing in royal life happened in isolation. Her phone buzzed with a text from William. "Can we talk tonight? Some interesting conversations happening today." She knew immediately that he had been fielding calls from family members and palace officials. William's position as heir to the throne meant he often found himself in the middle of family diplomatic situations, trying to balance everyone's interests while maintaining family unity. That evening, Kate and William took a long walk through the gardens of their Norfolk home, Anmer Hall. The children were staying with Kate's parents for the weekend, giving them rare privacy to discuss the growing palace tensions without little ears listening. "Aunt Anne spoke with Papa today," William began, his hands clasped behind his back as they walked along the tree-lined path. "She's worried about the optics of your collaboration," Kate nodded. She had suspected this was coming, but hearing it confirmed still stung a little. "Are you worried too?" William stopped walking and turned to face her. "I'm proud of what you and Papa are accomplishing. The work is important and you're the right person to help him with it. But I'm also concerned about the family dynamics." "What kind of dynamics?" Kate asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Some family members feel like Papa is showing favoritism. Others worry that your prominence in this initiative might overshadow their own charitable work. And a few are concerned about the precedent it sets for future collaborations." Kate understood the complexity of the situation better now. The royal family operated like a carefully balanced ecosystem, where any significant change in one area could have ripple effects throughout the entire system. "Maybe I should step back," she suggested quietly. "Let Charles handle the environmental work on his own." "No," William said firmly. "That's not the solution. The work you're doing together is too important to abandon because of palace politics." As they continued their walk, William explained what he had learned from his conversations with family members and advisors. The concerns weren't really about Kate or Charles individually. They were about the changing nature of royal roles and responsibilities in the modern era. "The challenge is that we're all trying to figure out how to be relevant and effective in today's world," William said. "Everyone wants to make a meaningful contribution, but there's only so much public attention and resources to go around." The next morning, Kate made a decision that would surprise everyone involved. Instead of scaling back her collaboration with Charles or trying to defend it to critics, she decided to take a completely different approach. She called Charles first, explaining her idea for addressing the family concerns. Then she reached out to Princess Anne, the Duchess of Edinburgh, and several other family members, requesting individual meetings to discuss how their charitable work might complement rather than compete with the environmental education initiative. "I want to understand everyone's perspectives," she told each of them, "and I want to find ways for all of our work to support each other, rather than creating unnecessary competition." The response to her outreach was mixed, but generally positive. Most family members appreciated being consulted, rather than simply informed about decisions that affected them. Even Anne, despite her initial concerns, agreed to meet and discuss potential solutions. However, not everyone was pleased with Kate's diplomatic efforts. Some palace insiders viewed her proactive approach as presumptuous, suggesting that she was overstepping her role by trying to coordinate family charitable activities. "She's acting like she's already queen," one unnamed palace source was quoted as saying in a gossip column. "It's creating tension because no one knows exactly what her authority is in these matters." These criticisms reached Kate through her media monitoring team, and they stung more than she had expected. She'd been trying to build bridges and find solutions, but her efforts were being interpreted by some as power-grabbing moves. That night, as she prepared for bed, Kate reflected on how quickly a positive collaboration had become a source of family tension. She still believed in the work she and Charles were doing, but she was beginning to understand that good intentions weren't always enough to navigate the complex world of royal relationships and public perception. The atmosphere in the palace reached a breaking point during the monthly senior royals meeting, a gathering that typically focused on coordinating schedules and charitable commitments. This time, however, the environmental education project dominated the agenda in ways that Charles had never intended. Princess Anne sat at the polished conference table with her arms crossed, while the Duchess of Edinburgh shuffled through papers with obvious irritation. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and even the usually diplomatic palace secretary seemed nervous as he read through the agenda items. "Before we discuss the quarterly calendar," Anne began, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room." Charles knew exactly what she meant, but he let her continue rather than interrupting. "The Environmental Education Initiative has generated significant media attention," Anne said, her voice measured but firm. "While the cause is admirable, the way it's been presented to the public has created some unintended consequences." She gestured to a stack of newspapers and printed articles on the table. The headlines painted a picture of Kate as Charles's chosen partner in modernizing the monarchy, with other family members relegated to supporting roles. "I've received calls from 3 different journalists this week asking why Catherine is taking the lead on environmental issues when I've been working on sustainability projects for over a decade," the Duchess of Edinburgh added, her frustration evident. Charles felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had been so focused on the positive aspects of working with Kate that he hadn't fully considered how it might affect his other family members' established charitable territories. "The issue isn't the work itself," Anne clarified. "The issue is the messaging and coordination. When the palace announces new initiatives without consulting existing charitable frameworks, it creates confusion for donors, media, and the public." At that moment, Kate entered the room with her private secretary. She had been invited to join the latter part of the meeting to discuss implementation details, but she quickly realized she was walking into something much more complicated than a scheduling discussion. "I apologize for interrupting," she said, sensing the tension immediately. "Perhaps I should come back later." "No, please stay," Charles said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Your input would be valuable for this conversation." Kate sat down carefully, maintaining her composure, despite feeling like she had inadvertently stepped into a minefield. She had prepared to discuss timelines and budget allocations, not family diplomatic challenges. "Catherine," the Duchess of Edinburgh said, turning to face her directly, "I wanted to understand how your environmental education project relates to the sustainability programs I've been developing with rural schools." The question was polite but pointed. Kate recognized it as an opportunity to either escalate the tension or help resolve it. "I honestly wasn't aware of the full scope of your rural education work," Kate admitted. "That's my mistake, and I should have done more research before moving forward." Her honest response seemed to diffuse some of the immediate tension in the room. Anne's expression softened slightly, and even the Duchess of Edinburgh appeared somewhat reassured by Kate's acknowledgement. "Perhaps this is a coordination issue rather than a competition issue," Charles suggested, seizing on the opening Kate had created. "Maybe we need better systems for sharing information about our charitable initiatives before they're finalized." Over the next hour, the family members worked through a framework for better communication about their various projects. Kate suggested creating a quarterly coordination meeting specifically for charitable work, where family members could share upcoming initiatives and identify opportunities for collaboration or mutual support. "I'd be happy to help organize these coordination meetings," Kate offered. "It might be easier for someone without an extensive existing portfolio to take on the administrative aspects." Again, her practical approach seemed to resonate with the group. By positioning herself as a facilitator rather than a competitor, she was able to transform the dynamic from conflict to collaboration. However, not everyone was convinced by these diplomatic efforts. After the meeting ended, several palace staff members gathered in a private office to discuss what they had observed. "She's clever, I'll give her that," said one senior advisor. "But this coordination role she's proposing could give her significant influence over family, charitable activities, or it could genuinely help resolve conflicts before they become public relations problems," countered another staff member who had worked closely with Kate on previous projects. The divide among palace staff reflected a broader uncertainty about Kate's evolving role within the royal family. Some saw her diplomatic skills and collaborative approach as exactly what the monarchy needed for the modern era. Others worried that her growing influence might upset traditional hierarchies and protocols. Meanwhile, in the media, royal correspondents were having their own debates about the significance of these behind-the-scenes developments. Some interpreted the family meeting as evidence of serious discord, while others saw it as a healthy sign of open communication and collaborative problem-solving. The fact that they're having these conversations directly rather than through intermediaries suggests a level of trust and mutual respect, royal expert Victoria Palmer told her television audience. Families that work together successfully often have to navigate these kinds of coordination challenges. But other commentators were less optimistic. When you have multiple people trying to lead on similar issues, it inevitably creates competition for resources and attention, wrote royal biographer Marcus Hartwell in his weekly column. The question is whether this family can manage that competition constructively, or whether it will create lasting divisions. Kate, reading these various interpretations at home that evening, felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. She had simply wanted to work on projects that could help children and families. Instead, she found herself at the center of discussions about royal family power dynamics and media management strategies. William found her in their home office, staring at her laptop screen with a troubled expression. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently, sitting down beside her. "Not about the work," Kate replied, "but about whether I'm the right person to be doing it. Maybe someone with more experience in family diplomacy would be better suited for this kind of collaboration." William shook his head. The family diplomacy challenges would exist regardless of who Papa chose to work with. The difference is that you're actually trying to address them constructively, instead of just hoping they'll go away. His support meant everything to Kate, but she still felt the weight of expectations and scrutiny that came with her position. Every decision she made seemed to have implications beyond what she initially intended. The next day brought a surprising development that would shift the entire dynamic once again. Princess Anne called Kate directly, requesting a private lunch meeting at Anne's country home. It was an unusual invitation, given that their previous interactions had been primarily formal and protocol-driven. "I wanted to speak with you away from palace politics," Anne explained when Kate arrived at Gatcombe Park. "There are some things I think you should understand about family dynamics that aren't immediately obvious to newcomers." As they walked through Anne's gardens before lunch, the older royal shared insights about managing charitable work within the complex ecosystem of royal duties and family relationships. Her perspective helped Kate understand that the tensions surrounding her collaboration with Charles weren't really personal criticisms, but rather symptoms of larger systemic challenges that the family had been grappling with for years. "The key," Anne explained, "is to be strategic about when to lead, when to support, and when to step back. It's not about avoiding conflict entirely, but about choosing your battles wisely and always keeping the bigger picture in mind." This conversation would prove to be a turning point in how Kate approached her royal role, though she didn't realize it at the time. Anne's mentorship offered her a roadmap for navigating palace politics while still pursuing meaningful charitable work. The turning point came unexpectedly during a routine visit to a primary school in Manchester. Kate and Charles had planned the visit as a low-key opportunity to see their environmental education program in action, but what they discovered there would reshape their entire approach to royal collaboration. 8-year-old Emma Thompson raised her hand tentatively during the school assembly where Kate was speaking about gardening and environmental awareness. The little girl's question was simple but profound. "Princess Catherine, why don't all the royals work together on helping children like us?" The innocent question, asked in front of local media and dozens of schoolchildren, highlighted exactly what the palace had been missing in all their diplomatic maneuvering and careful protocol discussions. While adults had been focused on territory and hierarchy, children were wondering why the people meant to serve them weren't obviously working as a team. Kate glanced at Charles, who was sitting nearby, and saw the same realization dawning in his eyes. Their collaboration hadn't failed because it excluded other family members. It had failed because they hadn't found ways to include them meaningfully from the beginning. "That's a wonderful question, Emma," Kate replied, kneeling down to the child's eye level. "You know what? You're absolutely right. We should all be working together, and I think you've just given us a very important idea." After the school visit, Kate and Charles spent the drive back to London, brainstorming a completely different approach to their environmental initiative. Instead of positioning it as a collaboration between just the two of them, they would restructure it as a royal family-wide effort, with each member contributing their unique expertise and established charitable networks. Anne has extensive experience with rural communities, Charles mused as their car navigated London traffic. Sophie has strong connections with educational organizations. Edward has experience with youth development programs. Kate pulled out her phone and began making notes. And instead of creating something new that might compete with existing programs, we could create a framework that supports and amplifies what everyone is already doing. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity, but implementing it would require careful diplomacy and genuine collaboration, rather than the superficial coordination they had attempted before. Their first step was to request individual meetings with each senior royal family member, but this time with a completely different agenda. Instead of asking for support for their project, they would ask for guidance on how to support existing family charitable initiatives. Princess Anne was their first meeting, and her response surprised them both. "You want to help promote my rural education programs?" she asked, clearly skeptical. "Why would that benefit your environmental initiative?" "Because they're not separate things," Kate explained. "Rural education, environmental awareness, children's development, they're all connected. If we can show how they support each other, everyone's work becomes more effective." Charles nodded enthusiastically. "Rather than competing for media attention or donor support, we could create a unified message about the royal family's commitment to children's futures." Anne studied them both for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "That would require genuine coordination, not just scheduling meetings. Are you prepared for that level of complexity?" "We're prepared to try," Kate replied honestly. "And if it doesn't work, we'll be honest about that too." Over the following weeks, Kate and Charles held similar conversations with the Duchess of Edinburgh, the Earl of Wessex, and several other family members. Each meeting revealed new opportunities for collaboration, but also highlighted the practical challenges of coordinating multiple charitable initiatives without creating bureaucratic nightmares. The breakthrough came during a family dinner at Windsor Castle, where the conversation naturally turned to their various charitable projects. Instead of the careful diplomatic discussions they had been having in formal meetings, family members began sharing genuine excitement about each other's work. "I never realized how much overlap there was between our different programs," the Duchess of Edinburgh admitted over dessert. "Sophie's literacy initiatives could perfectly complement the environmental education project, and my youth leadership programs already include environmental components," Edward added. "We could easily expand those elements and create better connections with what Charles and Catherine are developing." For the first time since the collaboration began, the conversation felt natural and enthusiastic rather than forced or territorial. Kate realized that the key had been creating space for family members to see the connections themselves, rather than trying to convince them of predetermined partnerships. However, not everyone was immediately convinced by this new collaborative approach. Some palace staff members worried that coordinating multiple royal, charitable initiatives would create logistical nightmares and dilute the impact of individual projects. "Managing one royal initiative is complex enough," complained one senior advisor during a staff meeting. "Trying to coordinate 5 or 6 different programs sounds like a recipe for confusion and inefficiency." These concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Royal charitable work involved complex relationships with donors, partner organizations, and media outlets. Any changes to established programs could have unintended consequences that might take months or years to fully understand. Kate addressed these concerns by proposing a pilot program approach. Instead of attempting to coordinate all royal charitable activities immediately, they would start with one specific initiative: a summer environmental education program for disadvantaged children, and involve multiple family members in clearly defined roles. Anne would handle rural outreach, Kate explained to the skeptical staff members. Sophie would manage educational partnerships. Edward would oversee youth leadership components. Charles and I would coordinate overall messaging and strategy. The pilot program structure allowed everyone to maintain their existing charitable commitments while testing whether deeper collaboration could enhance rather than complicate their work. But even as the family began to coalesce around this new approach, external pressures continued to create challenges. Royal correspondents and commentators were still focused on the original narrative of competition and tension, and some seemed reluctant to acknowledge the evolving collaborative dynamic. Palace sources suggest that recent family meetings have been tense, reported one tabloid newspaper. Some insiders believe the king's partnership with Princess Catherine has created lasting divisions. That won't be easily resolved. Kate found these reports particularly frustrating because they contradicted her direct experience of increasingly positive family interactions. She was beginning to understand that media narratives often had their own momentum, independent of actual facts or developments. The situation became more complicated when a leaked email from a palace staff member suggested that some employees were still concerned about the long-term implications of Kate's growing influence within the family's charitable activities. She's essentially positioning herself as the coordinator of royal family charitable work. The anonymous source was quoted as saying, "That's a lot of influence for someone who hasn't been in the family for as long as some others." This leak created exactly the kind of public speculation that Kate had been trying to avoid. Suddenly, the collaborative approach she and Charles had been developing was being interpreted as a power grab rather than a genuine attempt at family cooperation. William was particularly frustrated by the leak, recognizing that it threatened to undermine all the diplomatic progress Kate had made with family members over the previous weeks. "Someone is deliberately trying to sabotage this collaboration," he told Kate privately. "The question is whether it's someone inside the family or someone on staff with their own agenda." As they prepared for the next phase of their collaborative initiative, Kate realized that navigating royal family dynamics was only part of the challenge. Managing the complex ecosystem of staff, media, and public perception would require just as much careful attention and strategic thinking. The leaked email scandal reached its peak during what should have been a triumphant moment for the royal family's collaborative environmental initiative. The summer program for disadvantaged children had been successfully launched in 12 schools across England, with each senior royal contributing their expertise exactly as planned. Yet instead of celebrating this achievement, the palace found itself in crisis management mode. Kate discovered the extent of the internal sabotage during an emergency meeting called by Charles's private secretary. The room was filled with senior staff members, their faces grim as they reviewed the morning's newspaper headlines: "Palace Civil War," "Royal Staff in Revolt," and most damaging of all, "Kate's power grab divides the family." "We have a serious leak problem," announced Sir Michael Hartwell, the King's principal private secretary. "Someone with access to confidential communications has been feeding information to the press, specifically to undermine the environmental education collaboration." Kate felt her stomach drop as she realized the implications. All their careful diplomatic work with family members could be destroyed if the public narrative continued to portray her as manipulative and power-hungry. "Do we know who?" Charles asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We have suspicions," Sir Michael replied carefully. "But we need to handle this delicately to avoid creating even more internal division." The investigation revealed something unexpected. The leaks weren't coming from family members or their immediate staff, but from a small group of longtime palace employees who felt threatened by the changing nature of royal charitable work. They had spent decades managing separate, clearly defined royal initiatives, and the new collaborative approach threatened their established roles and influence. "They're not trying to hurt Catherine personally," explained the head of palace security after reviewing the investigation findings. "They're trying to preserve the old way of doing things by making the new way appear problematic." This revelation was both relieving and concerning. It meant the family tensions were largely manufactured rather than genuine, but it also highlighted how resistant some institutional elements were to change and modernization. Kate's response to this discovery surprised everyone, including Charles. Instead of demanding punishment for the leakers or retreating from the collaborative approach, she requested a meeting with the disgruntled staff members. "I want to understand their concerns," she told Charles. "If they feel threatened by changes we're making, maybe we can find ways to address those concerns without abandoning the collaborative work." The meeting took place in a small conference room at Buckingham Palace, with Kate facing 5 longtime employees who had been identified as sources of the negative briefings. The atmosphere was tense, but Kate's approach was direct and respectful. "I know there have been concerns about how the environmental education collaboration might affect existing palace operations," she began. "I'd like to hear those concerns directly rather than through media reports." Margaret Thornberry, the aide who had first observed Kate and Charles working together, spoke for the group. "Your Royal Highness, we're not opposed to the charitable work itself. We're worried about the precedent it sets for how royal initiatives are managed." "What kind of precedent?" Kate asked genuinely. "Traditionally, each royal household manages its own charitable programs independently," Margaret explained. "That system has worked well for decades. The collaborative approach requires us to coordinate across households in ways that blur established lines of authority and responsibility." As the conversation continued, Kate began to understand that the staff concerns were primarily practical rather than personal. The employees weren't trying to sabotage her specifically. They were trying to protect operational systems that they believed were more efficient and manageable than the new collaborative model. What if we could find ways to maintain operational independence while still achieving collaborative outcomes? Kate suggested. Each household could continue managing its own programs, but we could create better communication systems to identify opportunities for mutual support. This compromise approach resonated with the staff members, who had been expecting confrontation rather than problem-solving. Over the following hour, they worked together to design a modified collaborative framework that preserved existing operational structures while enabling better coordination and shared messaging. However, repairing the damage from weeks of negative media coverage would prove more challenging than resolving the internal staff issues. Royal correspondents had invested heavily in the conflict narrative, and some seemed reluctant to acknowledge that the supposed family tensions had been largely manufactured. "Palace sources now claim that recent tensions have been resolved," wrote one skeptical journalist, "but observers note that such dramatic reversals in royal family dynamics are unusual and may indicate deeper ongoing issues." Kate realized that changing the media narrative would require demonstrable success rather than just explanations or denials. The summer environmental education program would need to show clear, measurable positive outcomes that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Fortunately, the results were beginning to speak for themselves. Teachers reported increased student engagement with environmental topics. Parents noted that children were bringing environmental awareness home and encouraging family behavior changes. Partner organizations saw increased volunteer applications and donations. More importantly, the collaborative approach was creating efficiencies that impressed even the skeptical staff members. Anne's rural networks provided access to schools that Charles and Kate couldn't have reached independently. Sophie's educational partnerships brought expertise that enhanced program quality. Edward's youth leadership components created sustainable long-term engagement rather than one-time events. "The numbers don't lie," Charles told Kate as they reviewed the quarterly program reports. "We're reaching more children with better programming, at lower cost per participant than any of us achieved working separately. But the most powerful validation came from an unexpected source." During a visit to one of the program schools, Kate encountered Emma Thompson, the 8-year-old whose question had sparked their collaborative rethinking months earlier. "Princess Catherine," Emma called out excitedly. "My teacher said all the royals are working together now to help kids like us. Is that really true?" "It's really true," Kate confirmed, kneeling down to Emma's level just as she had during their first meeting. "And it's working better than we ever imagined." "I'm glad," Emma said seriously. "My dad says when grown-ups work together instead of fighting, everyone gets better results." The simplicity of that observation stayed with Kate long after the school visit ended. Emma had understood intuitively what the adults had taken months to figure out. Collaboration produced better outcomes than competition, but only when the collaboration was genuine rather than forced. That evening, Kate called Princess Anne to share Emma's comment and to thank her for the mentorship that had helped make the successful collaboration possible. "You've learned the most important lesson about royal life," Anne told her. "It's not about avoiding conflict or controversy. It's about staying focused on the people you're meant to serve, regardless of what anyone else thinks or says." As Kate prepared for bed that night, she reflected on how much had changed since that first meeting in Charles's study. The environmental education program had evolved from a simple collaboration between two family members into a model for how the royal family could work together more effectively across all their charitable activities. More importantly, she had learned that navigating royal family dynamics required patience, diplomacy, and genuine commitment to shared goals rather than personal recognition. The tensions and challenges hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had been transformed from obstacles into opportunities for growth and improvement. The leaked email scandal, which had seemed so threatening at the time, had actually accelerated positive changes by forcing everyone to examine their assumptions and find better ways of working together. Sometimes, Kate realized, the best outcomes emerged from the most difficult challenges. 6 months after the environmental education program launched, an unexpected crisis would test everything Kate and Charles had built together. The challenge came not from within the royal family or palace staff, but from external political pressures that threatened to derail their carefully constructed, collaborative approach. The trouble began with a parliamentary debate about government funding for environmental education in schools. Opposition MPs seized on the royal family's environmental initiative as evidence that the monarchy was overstepping its constitutional role by influencing policy areas that should be left to elected officials. We have an unelected king and his daughter-in-law effectively setting educational policy for British schools, declared MP Sarah Richardson during a heated Commons debate. This represents a dangerous expansion of royal influence into areas where they have no democratic mandate. The criticism caught the palace completely off guard. Charles and Kate had been careful to focus their program on private fundraising and voluntary participation by schools. They hadn't sought government funding or tried to influence official curriculum requirements. Yet somehow their charitable work was being portrayed as constitutional overreach. This is exactly the kind of controversy we were trying to avoid, Charles told Kate during an emergency meeting in his private office. The moment our charitable work becomes politically contentious, it threatens the monarchy's traditional position above party politics. Kate understood the seriousness of the situation. The British constitutional system depended on the royal family remaining politically neutral, and any perception that they were pushing particular policy agendas could damage the institution's credibility and public support. The media response was swift and polarizing. Conservative newspapers defended the royal environmental work as valuable charitable activity that complemented rather than competed with government programs. Liberal publications questioned whether any royal charitable work could truly be non-political in areas where government policy was involved. The royal family cannot have it both ways, wrote constitutional expert Professor David Henley in The Guardian. Either their charitable work is genuinely apolitical and therefore limited in scope and impact, or it addresses significant social issues and therefore inevitably has political implications. This constitutional crisis created exactly the kind of division within the royal family that Kate had been working so hard to heal. Some family members believed they should immediately scale back the environmental program to avoid further political controversy. Others argued that retreating would send the wrong message about the monarchy's commitment to serving the public good. Princess Anne was characteristically direct in her assessment during a hastily arranged family meeting. If we abandon successful charitable work every time politicians complain, we'll end up doing nothing meaningful at all. But the Duchess of Edinburgh expressed the opposite concern. If we're seen as political actors rather than constitutional figures, it could undermine public support for the monarchy itself. Charles found himself caught between these competing perspectives, trying to protect both the institution of the monarchy and the valuable work they had been doing together. Kate, meanwhile, was dealing with a more personal dimension of the crisis. Some people are suggesting I should step back from royal duties entirely until this controversy dies down, she confided to William during a private walk through their garden. They think my background as a commoner makes me more likely to be seen as political rather than traditional. William was furious at this suggestion. You've done nothing wrong. The environmental program has been successful and beneficial. The political controversy is manufactured by people who want to score points against the monarchy. But Kate was beginning to understand that her position within the royal family made her particularly vulnerable to political attacks. As someone who had married into the monarchy rather than being born into it, her motives were more likely to be questioned, and her actions more likely to be interpreted as calculated rather than traditional. The turning point came from an unexpected source. The children and families who had participated in the environmental education program When news of the political controversy reached the communities where the program operated, parents and teachers began speaking out in defense of the royal initiative. My daughter has learned more about caring for the environment in the past 6 months than in all her previous years of school, wrote parent Maria Gonzalez in a letter to her local newspaper. How can anyone say that teaching children to care about their planet is political manipulation? Teacher James Morrison organized a petition signed by over 200 educators supporting the continuation of the Royal Environmental Program. This isn't about politics, he wrote. It's about giving our children tools and knowledge they need for their futures. Most powerfully, the children themselves began expressing their views. 8-year-old Emma Thompson, whose question had started the collaborative approach, wrote a letter to the king that was later shared with his permission. Dear King Charles, her letter read in careful child handwriting. Some grown-ups are saying you and Princess Catherine shouldn't teach us about helping the earth. But learning about nature isn't about politics. It's about caring for our home. Please don't stop helping us. Learn. These grassroots expressions of support provided exactly what the royal family needed to respond to the political criticism. Clear evidence that their work was serving genuine public needs rather than pursuing hidden political agendas. Kate and Charles crafted a careful public response that acknowledged the constitutional concerns while defending the value of their charitable work. In a joint statement, they emphasized that the environmental education program was voluntary, privately funded, and focused on practical skills rather than political advocacy. Our role is to support and encourage, not to direct or mandate, the statement read. The environmental education program provides resources and opportunities for schools and families who choose to participate. It does not influence government policy or seek to replace official educational curricula. The response was measured and constitutional, but it didn't immediately resolve the political pressure. Several MPs continued to argue that any royal involvement in educational activities was inappropriate, regardless of funding sources or voluntary participation. However, public opinion polls began to show strong support for the royal environmental work, with over 70% of respondents saying they believe the monarchy should continue charitable activities that benefit children and communities. This public backing gave the royal family confidence to maintain their collaborative approach while being even more careful about constitutional boundaries. The crisis also led to important internal changes in how royal charitable work was structured and communicated. New protocols were established for reviewing potential political implications before launching initiatives. Legal advisors were brought in to ensure that all charitable activities clearly stayed within constitutional boundaries. We've learned that good intentions aren't enough, Kate reflected during a conversation with Charles as they reviewed the new protocols. We need to be more sophisticated about understanding how our work might be interpreted and misunderstood. Charles agreed, but he also emphasized that the controversy had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened their collaborative approach. The fact that we weathered this crisis together with family unity rather than division shows that we've built something more resilient than I initially hoped. The environmental education program not only survived the political crisis, but emerged stronger and more carefully structured. The protocols developed during the controversy would later serve as a model for other royal charitable collaborations, helping the family navigate the complex intersection of public service and constitutional responsibility. Most importantly for Kate, the crisis had tested her resolve and commitment to royal duty in ways that no protocol training could have prepared her for. She had faced calls to withdraw from public service, weathered personal criticism, and navigated complex constitutional issues, while maintaining her focus on serving the children and families who benefited from the program. You've proven yourself under pressure, Anne told her privately after the worst of the controversy had passed. That's the kind of test that shows whether someone truly belongs in this role. 1 year after that first meeting in Charles's study, the transformation within the royal family was evident to everyone who worked closely with them. The environmental education program had not only survived political controversy and internal tensions, but had evolved into a model that other royal families across Europe were studying and adapting for their own charitable work. Kate stood in the same Windsor Castle corridor where she had walked nervously 12 months earlier, but now her steps were confident and purposeful. She was heading to what had become a monthly tradition, the Royal Family Collaborative Planning Meeting, where all senior family members gathered to coordinate their charitable activities and identify new opportunities for mutual support. The meeting room buzzed with genuine enthusiasm as family members shared updates from their various programs. Princess Anne reported on the expansion of rural environmental education into Scotland and Wales. The Duchess of Edinburgh announced new corporate partnerships for literacy, programs that incorporated environmental themes. Edward described youth leadership initiatives that were now feeding graduates into other family members' charitable organizations. "The numbers are remarkable," Charles said, reviewing the annual impact report prepared by their joint communications team. "We're reaching 3 times as many children as we were individually, with programs that are more comprehensive and effective than anything we achieved working separately." Kate listened to the discussion with quiet satisfaction, but also with awareness of how much had changed beyond just the statistics. The family dynamics that had once been sources of tension and competition had transformed into genuine collaboration and mutual support. "I think we should talk about expanding this model to other areas," suggested the Duchess of Edinburgh. "Health and wellness programs, arts education, even international development work could benefit from the same collaborative approach." The suggestion sparked an animated discussion about possibilities and logistics. Kate found herself naturally facilitating the conversation, helping family members identify connections between their interests and expertise, without anyone feeling pressured or excluded. "You've become quite the diplomat," Anne observed quietly during a break in the meeting. "A year ago you were worried about stepping on toes. Now you're helping everyone find ways to work together more effectively." Anne's comment reflected a broader recognition within the family that Kate's role had evolved in ways that none of them had initially anticipated. She hadn't become a coordinator because she was power-hungry or manipulative, as some critics had suggested. She had become a coordinator because she was genuinely good at it, and because the family had discovered they needed someone with her particular combination of skills and perspective. After the family meeting ended, Kate and Charles took their traditional walk through the castle gardens to debrief and plan next steps. These conversations had become one of the most valuable aspects of their collaboration, providing space for honest reflection away from formal meetings and protocol requirements. "I've been thinking about something Emma Thompson said during our last school visit," Kate mentioned as they walked past the rose garden where Charles had been experimenting with sustainable growing techniques. "What's that?" Charles asked, pausing to examine one of his hybrid varieties. "She asked whether the royals would keep working together, even when she grows up and doesn't need the children's programs anymore," Kate said. "It made me realize that we've created something that goes beyond any single initiative." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "The collaborative approach has changed how we think about our roles and responsibilities. It's not just about this environmental program anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by Kate's private secretary, who approached with a message that would present their next challenge and opportunity. "Your Royal Highness," the secretary said, "we've received an invitation for you and His Majesty to present your collaborative model at the International Conference on Modern Monarchy in Copenhagen next month. They specifically want to discuss how royal families can adapt their charitable work for the 21st century." Kate looked at Charles with surprise and excitement. The invitation represented recognition that their collaboration had become something worth studying and potentially replicating by other royal institutions. "That's quite an honor," Charles said, "but it's also a significant responsibility. We'd be representing not just our own work, but the entire concept of collaborative royal charitable activity." Over the following weeks, Kate and Charles worked together to develop a presentation that honestly addressed both the successes and challenges of their collaborative approach. They included input from other family members, palace staff, and even some of the children and families who had participated in their programs. The presentation in Copenhagen was a turning point in how their work was perceived internationally. Royal correspondents who had initially focused on palace tensions and family conflicts now wrote about innovation and modernization. Constitutional experts, who had worried about political overreach, praised the careful balance between public service and institutional responsibility. The British royal family has demonstrated that tradition and innovation can coexist successfully wrote Danish royal expert Dr. Lars Nielsen. Their collaborative approach maintains constitutional propriety while increasing charitable impact. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. During the conference, Kate received a video message from the students at the Manchester school where she and Charles had first tested their collaborative approach. "Dear Princess Catherine and King Charles," the children said in unison, "thank you for showing us that working together is always better than working alone. We're using that lesson in our own projects now." Emma Thompson, now 9 years old and more articulate than ever, delivered the final part of the message. "You taught us that caring about the environment means caring about each other. That's the most important lesson we've learned." Watching the video in her Copenhagen hotel room that evening, Kate reflected on how much had changed since that first tentative conversation about environmental education. What had started as a simple collaboration between two family members had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of how the royal family approached their public service responsibilities. The tensions and challenges hadn't disappeared entirely. Palace politics still required careful navigation. Media scrutiny remained intense. Constitutional boundaries still needed constant attention. But the family had developed systems and relationships that turned these challenges into opportunities for growth and improvement rather than sources of division and conflict. Most importantly, they had proven that meaningful change was possible within traditional institutions, as long as everyone involved remained committed to serving something larger than their individual interests or ambitions. 6 months later, when William and Kate's youngest child asked why Grandpa Charles and Mummy worked together so much, Kate's answer was simple: "Because we discovered that we can help more people when we work as a team than when we work by ourselves." The environmental education program continued to expand, but it was no longer the central focus of Kate and Charles's collaboration. They had moved on to addressing housing issues affecting young families, supporting small business development in rural communities, and developing innovative approaches to mental health support for children and adolescents. Each new initiative followed the collaborative model they had developed: careful coordination with existing family charitable work, genuine partnership rather than superficial cooperation, transparent communication about goals and methods, and constant focus on serving the people who needed their help most. The palace insiders who had once worried about Kate's growing influence now spoke with admiration about her diplomatic skills and collaborative instincts. The family members who had initially felt threatened by change had become enthusiastic advocates for the new approaches to royal charitable work, and the children who had benefited from their programs were growing up with a different understanding of what public service could look like. Not distant and formal, but engaged and collaborative. Not competitive and territorial, but generous and inclusive. As Kate walked through those same Windsor Castle corridors now, she no longer thought about stepping carefully to avoid unknown protocols or unintended conflicts. She thought about the next opportunity to bring people together around shared goals, the next chance to turn potential competition into actual collaboration, and the next way to demonstrate that working together really was better than working alone. The transformation had been complete, but it was also ongoing. Every day brought new opportunities to apply the lessons they had learned and to continue evolving their approach to royal service in ways that honored tradition while embracing positive change.